Symbols are important for any nation. A nation's flag is its statement of identity that transcends politics or ethnic origin. Its colours evoke feelings of loyalty and pride. From Olympic athletes to returned soldiers, the flag is something to win or die for. More than just a piece of cloth, it is the expression of belonging. But did you know that God has a flag too? It's also a symbol of loyalty and ownership. We are living in the middle of a war, on a planet in rebellion. Alternative flags compete for our allegiance, and human traditions, philosophies and religious systems vie for our loyalty. In this life, knowingly or otherwise, we serve under one or the other. For over 500 years, the issue of loyalty was played out against the background of a world empire in the city of Rome. Some of the greatest events in history have taken place in and around the city.
The old city of Rome certainly was not built in a day. It's been growing for nearly 3,000 years and hasn't finished yet. For Rome is many cities in one, each with a rich and fascinating history. In the heart of the ancient city was the Forum, centre of a vast empire. From its embers rose medieval Rome, where Michelangelo lived and worked. Foreigners from many countries have settled in Rome, and the Piazza di Spagna is still the centre of the artists' quarter. Rome is also the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. Vatican City is actually an independent state within the city. This monument commemorates King Victor Emmanuel, who unified Italy in the mid-19th century. The origins of Rome lie in the ancient legend of Romulus and Remus being suckled by a she-wolf. Romulus built a village on the banks of the Tiber River 753 years before Christ. As Rome grew, it began to look invincible. Its iron rule extended around the globe. Amazingly, the rise of the Roman Empire had been predicted by the prophet Daniel some 550 years before the birth of Christ.
The prophecy is written as a series of cartoons, symbols that dramatically portray the rise and fall of empires.
The first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions in his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, "I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other."
Wind is the familiar biblical symbol for war and strife, while water represents peoples and nations. Out of this maelstrom of people emerge four animals, which the prophecy says represent kingdoms.
Those great beasts which are four kings which arise out of the earth. The fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth.
But these animals are not the sort that you see in a zoo.
The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it.
The lion was an apt symbol for Babylon, the empire ruling the world in Daniel's time.
When we go along the Ishtar processional way from the Ishtar gate, we see creatures on both sides, lions and also a kind of dragon. And the lion is the symbol of the goddess Ishtar. These two gods actually were the main gods in Babylon, and they are interesting insofar as they seem to appear also in the book of Daniel. There we have the dragon in the vision of Daniel, and the Ishtar goddess is represented by the lion.
The wings represent speed of movement and conquest, and the Bible pictures Babylon both as a lion and an eagle. But after Nebuchadnezzar's conquest of Jerusalem, Babylon made no further conquests. Nebuchadnezzar settled down to build his city and rule his empire. Hence the wings were plucked off. the beast became like a man, representing Nebuchadnezzar himself. But then follows a second animal, representative of the second nation to step onto the world stage.
And suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh.
The bear was a fitting symbol for the next empire. Cyrus the Persian conquered the Medes, incorporating them into his kingdom. The bear was hunched up on one side, indicating that the Persians were the stronger partner in the Medo-Persian coalition. Cyrus conquered other nations as well. The 3 ribs represent the conquest of Lydia in the north, now in modern Turkey, Egypt in the south, and Babylon.
Cyrus was really the key person during the conquest of Babylon, and according to what we know from historical sources, he conquered Babylon in a rather clever way. He diverts the waters of the Euphrates River that ran through the city of Babylon. They actually, the city was well walled and defended, but there were special gates, water gates, that allowed the water to flow underneath the walls into the city, and he diverted the waters away from that, and they were able to, the Persian army was able to go underneath the water gates and penetrate the city. And in the middle of the night, very quickly, without hardly a fight, the city fell. And of course, this correlates very nicely with the description of the fall of Babylon in the book of Daniel.
The third kingdom, represented by a leopard, follows closely on the heels of the others.
After this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it.
The leopard pictures the next world empire. This swiftly moving animal with 4 wings symbolises the rapid conquest of the Greek general Alexander the Great.
Well, of course, Alexander was a terrifically brilliant fellow. He won all his battles. He was personally very brave. And Alexander preferred to fight pitched battles rather than to try some strategy, because he wanted the battle to be decisive.
Alexander was actually a young man when he died, I think around 30 years of age. And he left a huge empire, actually, reaching from Europe all the way to India, Far East, so to speak. And when he left, his death was sudden. We don't know whether he was murdered or whether he died by a malaria type of disease, but he had no successor. So the generals that were accompanying him, they divided the country, the big, huge empire, actually, amongst themselves.
The 4 divisions of the Greek Empire were symbolised by the 4 heads of the leopard. This was the situation until the rise of the next world empire.
And behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns.
The 4th world empire was Rome, named after the city which became its capital.
As Rome grew over the famous 7 hills, so did its empire. Roman roads reached in every direction, and along them marched conquering armies. Rome became the most powerful political and military organisation the world had seen up to that time. Out of civil war emerged one of the most brilliant of a long line of rulers, Julius Caesar. A skillful general, he extended the empire north into Gaul. But in 44 BC, at the peak of his power, he was assassinated. His successor, young Octavian, defeated his rivals Antony and Cleopatra of Egypt. To commemorate his victory, a temple was erected in Rome. Rebuilt by the Emperor Hadrian, it was dedicated to the sun and planets and known as the Pantheon. Built as a sun temple, the hole in the roof, 10 metres across, still allows the sun's rays to shine onto the floor below where sacrifices were once offered.
Rome absorbed all the religions of the people she conquered. To the Roman pantheon of gods was added all the Greek gods and those of Asia Minor, Egypt and Persia. But in return, Rome expected its subjected peoples to be loyal to the Emperor of Rome, himself a god. They were permitted to retain their own worship as long as they worshipped the Emperor as an act of loyalty. While most nations and religions were happy to compromise with this arrangement, the Jews refused to bow down to the emperor God or give up their national independence. In the Jewish war that began in 66 AD, thousands of Jews were killed.
This arch was erected in honour of Titus, who, after a 6-month siege, stormed Jerusalem, burning the temple to the ground. This relief shows him riding in triumph through the streets of Rome, bearing the spoils of victory, including the 7-branched candlestick and other items looted from the temple in Jerusalem. Jews were severely persecuted and driven out of Rome. Christians at that time worshipped on the Jewish Sabbath, so they were considered a sect of Judaism and suffered the same fate. They also worshipped only one God and refused to worship the emperor. Arrested and tortured, thousands died in arenas around the empire or were slaughtered in cold blood. Rome's cruelest emperor was Nero. He set fire to Rome to burn down the slums in order to build his great golden palace. He had the Christians blamed for causing the fire. Thousands were killed in the persecution which followed. It was Nero's sport to tie Christians to stakes, cover them with tar, and set them alight. The catacombs consist of over 1,000 kilometres of tunnels under the city of Rome. The maze can still baffle modern explorers. The Christians met here in times of persecution. Untold thousands of martyrs lie buried here. In the tunnel walls, niches were hollowed out and the bodies placed inside. They tell their own terrible tale, heads severed from the body and broken bones calcined by fire. Across each grave, a marble slab was placed and inscribed with epitaphs of hope of the future resurrection from the dead. The prophecy of Daniel chapter 7 is quite specific. There were to be just 4 world empires and no more. But the prophecy has more to say about the future of Rome's successors, particularly the infamous Antichrist.
The prophecy pictured the 4th beast with 10 horns, representing Rome. But what of these horns?
The 10 horns are 10 kings that shall arise from this kingdom.
For several centuries, waves of barbarians from the north and east attacked Rome. The Huns, the Vandals and the Ostrogoths. Political instability, immorality, corruption and a rising tide of nationalism spelled doom to the empire which finally collapsed in 476 AD. But the prophecy went on to speak of the rise of an even greater power.
I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words.
The messenger then complains to Daniel about this little horn.
The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings.
The little horn rose out of the ruins of the Roman Empire and was contemporary with the other kingdoms of Europe.
The idea of Rome, the ideal of the whole Europe ruled from one place, survived. But who, more than anybody else, symbolized and did in fact enjoy this unified leadership? If any one person did, it was most certainly the Pope of Rome. The Roman Catholic Church is his successor to the Roman Empire. There's no question about that.
Though the horn looks like a man, the fulfillment is not met by a single person. This power is to last from the end of the Roman Empire until the judgment at the end of the world and the second coming of Jesus. More specifically, it will exercise power for a long period.
Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, and times, and half a time.
Time in the Bible is another word for a year, as the footnote in many Bibles explains. The word times is the double form meaning 2 years, while half a time is half a year. Add this up and you get 3.5 years. A comparison of Bible prophecy shows that a prophetic year contains 12 months of 30 days each, a total of 360 days. So Daniel's prophecy looks like this. The book of Revelation confirms that the prophetic period of a time, times, and half a time is equivalent to 1260 days. A well-known and accepted key to prophecy is that a day in prophecy equals 1 year. There is Bible evidence to support this. In a prophecy about Israel's future, the people were to wander in the desert for 40 years, 1 year for each day the spies had inspected the promised land. That's in Numbers 14:34. Ezekiel, a prophet contemporary with Daniel, acted out a prophecy and was told by God, I have laid on you a day for each year. And so with the 1260 days. They represent 1260 years of authoritarianism and supremacy of persecution and spiritual darkness.
Christian theology was becoming more and more distanced from Scripture. And the Christian leaders, in many cases, were becoming more and more corrupt.
Kings and bishops struggled over who would really rule and who would really control. And there was, of course, a kind of I think we'd call it a late medieval decadence that developed in the church. Many of the bishops of the church were no longer shepherds of the flock, but they were administrators who were governing huge areas of property, lands and all sorts of mines and everything of that nature, and they were very wealthy based upon that. They began to live opulent lives. They were less interested in spiritual things. There was a little sham of spirituality in the face of some of them, but what really was going on was something that caused a lot of cynicism among ordinary members.
This period in history is known as the Dark Ages or Middle Ages. It lasted for over 1,000 years. According to the prophecy, a single power ruled during this period. Many commentators and historians have seen that the little horn is the Antichrist of Bible prophecy. The New Testament speaks of the work of this apostasy that was to take hold of the Christian church. Before his death, Paul warned that the worst danger for Christians was not from outside the church, but from inside.
For I know this, that after my departure savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. Also from among yourselves men will rise up speaking perverse things to draw away the disciples after themselves.
More specifically, Paul warned that between his day and the second coming of Christ, there would be a falling away first. Paul described the apostasy as rebellion and the Antichrist as the man of lawlessness. That's 2 Thessalonians 2:3. Evidently, God's law would be the object of attack. Paul goes on to explain that the Antichrist, like Satan at the very beginning, would actually try and replace God.
He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God.
The Apostle John spoke of many antichrists. So again we see that the Antichrist is not one man, but rather a system of apostasy and rebellion. Daniel foretold the work of this little horn in his prophecy.
He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law.
But how could such a situation arise in the Christian church? It may have started with someone who became known as the 13th apostle.
The time of Constantine's accession to the throne, perhaps 20% of the population of the empire had now accepted the Christian faith. Constantine could see, however, that there was something about Christianity that caused what we call today upward mobility. People became better educated. People became systematized. People became organized. People admired work. People were trying to develop themselves in the modern sense of the word. And when he compared what the pagan religions offered in comparison, I think we'd say contrast, he decided that this was the better way to go. So by about 320, Constantine joins the Christian faith, although is not baptized.
I think it's a question whether Constantine was ever really a Christian at all. He wasn't baptized until his deathbed. And there are serious Christian scholars who doubt whether he really had much understanding of Christianity.
He announces himself a Christian. His mother, whose name was Helen, had been a Christian prior to that. And he announces now that Christianity will become the guiding religion in the empire. And so rapidly it became fashionable to become a Christian. All the way from the imperial palace, all sorts of governmental officials saw that it would be wise for them to shift into Christianity, and they began to adopt the faith of Christ because it was now what we call politically correct to be a Christian.
According to the prophecy in Daniel 7, the little horn would attempt to change the time and law. Only one of God's commandments has to do with time, the fourth. In other words, the little horn would attempt to change God's seventh-day rest day called the Sabbath. Yet Jesus said he would never change the law.
Do not think that I come to destroy the law or the prophets. I do not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled.
In the same way that Jesus didn't change the law, neither did his disciples. So who did? Dr. Samuel Bakioki is a world authority on the history of the Sabbath. He researched this subject at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome and even received a gold medal from the Pope for his work.
And what I found in the libraries there in Rome, where I did this research, that in the year 135 AD, Emperor Hadrian promulgated the most repressive, anti-Jewish, anti-Sabbath legislation. He prohibited categorically not only the practice of Judaism in general, but of 7-day Sabbath keeping in particular. And I found it was in that critical moment, when 7-day Sabbath keeping was prohibited by imperial legislation, that the Bishop of Rome, the bishop of a Gentile church. Most of the church members in Rome came not from a Jewish, but from a pagan, Gentile background. He said, hey, why should we suffer like Jews for observing the Sabbath? Why not show to the Roman authorities our separation, our differentiation from the Jews by changing the Sabbath to Sunday and Passover to Easter Sunday? So this is exactly what he did.
The real issue is not the day Christians should keep. On that question, the Bible is unequivocal. The day that Jesus and the apostles kept, the seventh day of the week called the Sabbath or Saturday. The first day of the week in the Bible, or Sunday in our calendar, is nowhere referred to as a day of rest or worship. There is only one day that Jesus kept, one day that he blessed, and one day that he sanctified. He asks us to obey and follow him. The issue comes down to relationships. Do I love Jesus enough to do what he has asked me to do? This is where our loyalty and obedience is tested, which brings us back to where we started. God's rest day is like a flag. Our national flag is a symbol of our history. It is flown on flagpoles all over the country at times of national celebration and of mourning. Many have died for it. Olympic athletes cry while it waves to the tune of the national anthem. And it's just a piece of cloth, but it stands for something. Does it really matter which day of the week you keep as long as you keep one? Well, in time of war, does it matter which flag you fly? We are in the middle of a world at war, and the flag we choose to fly does matter. For just like our flag, the seventh-day rest is a symbol of God's power as Creator, Saviour and Redeemer. It's more than just a piece of time. It's a symbol of our relationship with God, a public acknowledgement that we belong to him, a recognition of his divine authority, creative power, and redemptive grace that provides meaning to our existence. So, what flag will you choose to stand under?